Hi everyone, that's me. I bought a mock mill recently and I'm absolutely loving it. I've been grinding my own grains to make my own flour and playing around with some 100% whole grain loaves. It has created a bit of a challenge for me though. The first loaves that I made, I didn't really enjoy the taste too much, and I guess the texture wasn't what I was hoping for either. That's one of my first loaves that I made. So I kind of went on a bit of a quest really at that point to see what I could do to improve the texture of my 100% whole wheat loaves. That's one of the earlier results that I got from this method that I'm going to show you today. I'm really, really pleased with it. I've still got a bit of playing around with it. I think there's probably some things I can do, but this is a really easy kind of beginner method that you can use to get a lot more flavour and a better texture out of 100% whole wheat sourdough loaves. So the real trick to this recipe is that you soak the flour and water by themselves before you add anything else in. So this is 450 grams of whole wheat flour, not sifted at all, and I'm adding to that 405 grams of water. Now you just mix these two together, and what I've found is I've been getting the best results, and this method works the best with my schedule, is to mix this together the night before I make the bread. So I mix the flour and the water just until there aren't any dry bits left, and then I put this mixture into the fridge overnight. I guess this is really just an extended autolyse or a soaking, and what this does is for one, it hydrates all of the bran in the flour really fully before you start any fermentation or add any salt or anything. And the second thing is that the enzyme activity that takes place while the flour is soaking with the water releases some of the helps convert the starches in the flour to sugars, so you get a much better flavour in your loaf as well. So you just cover that and put it in the fridge until the next morning or the next evening, or when you're starting to mix your dough. Basically there's 12-hour gap in between each step. So here's my dough the next morning. It's really squidgy and very sort of looks quite solid, but actually it's very soft and pliable and extensible. So now I'm going to add the starter and the salt. So I just pretty much just spread out the dough. This is 130 grams of whole wheat starter that's been fed with the same flour that I milled myself, that the dough's made from. So I just kind of put that on. There's probably lots of ways that you can do this, but this is just what I have been doing, and it seems to work quite well. So I spread the starter out, and then just sort of squish it into the dough a bit, and then fold that over, and I put the salt on that top layer. I'm not sure if it makes any too much of a difference to keep the salt separate from the starter, but I figure it's better if they're probably not touching each other. I don't know. I don't have any scientific basis for that theory, but I just figure it probably can't hurt to keep the salt and the starter separate just at that initial part. So basically what I've been doing now is just kneading those two in. It only takes a couple of minutes. I'm not needing to do any gluten development necessarily in this. I'm really just kneading in order to mix in the starter and the salt. The gluten development in this style of loaf really takes place through that long autolyse, or that pre-soaking that the flour and the water gets. And also in the long bulk fermentation. So with this method, it's the same as look at that dough, it's really nice. It's very, very smooth and sort of silky at this point. So the gluten development just takes place through the long fermentation. This kneading is just mixing. So you know how long you've got to mix by the texture. After a while, this dough becomes really sticky. Once the starter and the salt start to go through the dough does change texture. It gets kind of wet. You can sort of see that there. It's pretty tacky and wet and sticky, and it does become more sticky. Yeah, it's sticking to my hands there. So once you're getting that sticky, wet sort of feel and appearance, you know that your starter and salt are pretty well incorporated. I just keep kneading this for a little bit longer, but you could also put this into a stand mixer or some kind of other mixer if you have one, but I just do it by hand. Yeah, it's really sticky now. So what I do then is just place my dough into my bowl and leave it for the day and just let it do its bulk fermentation. Um, I think it's really important to keep this in a cool place if you're going to leave it all day. If you're at home, obviously you can watch the dough and just leave it for as long as it takes to double in size and become visibly bubbly. But you can leave it all day if you keep it in a cool spot. In hot weather, I'd use an ice brick and some kind of esky or cooler box. So here's my dough in the evening. You can see the bubbles there. It's fermented pretty well. And what I do now is just at the end of the day I do some stretch and folds, then I shape the dough and then I bake it. Pretty simple. And I really like this method because I can do it any day of the week and it fits around work if I need it to. If I make this bread on the weekend, then I could just do it sort of over a shorter period, but I like this because I can leave it all day if I need to. So that's the first round of stretch and folds. I do 4 over an hour period. This is the second one, and basically the stretch and folds just help to give the dough structure and strength. You're sort of stretching the gluten and incorporating air as well gently, without knocking out too much air out of the dough, so it gives you the lightest possible loaf. You try and handle it pretty gently, and once you feel the dough starting to resist, you just stop. So don't go any further if the dough doesn't want to stretch. This is stretch and fold number 3. So over this hour I did 4 rounds, so there's 15 minutes break in between. So you just wet your hand, grab the dough, pull it up and sort of fold it over on itself. It's a really nice method to get a lighter loaf, especially with this whole wheat flour. And you can see that dough is pretty extensible. It's letting me stretch it like that, and that's a big part of that is that long autolyse in the fridge. So that was the 4th stretch and fold, and I think by this point I decided I'd had enough stretching and folding, and I wanted to get the loaf ready for baking. So I'm just using my trusty non-stick baking paper method here that you've probably seen in my other video. And if you've got really good dough handling skills and shaping skills, then you can use a banneton. You can pretty much handle this dough however you like. You could put it into a baking tin and bake a loaf style, but I'm just doing a really basic, easy version. So my shaping is really just a final round of stretch and folds. I don't do any other shaping of this dough. I just do 1 round of stretch and folds and just tip it out like that, and then I gently sort of tighten up the round just with my hands, and that's all I do. I've got a bit more development to do in my shaping, but this works for me, and it's really quick and easy, and it's a good method for beginners too, and you get a pretty good result. So having the table dry at this part is really handy. You probably saw me wipe the table dry. It just helps the dough to stick while you're pulling on it, tightening the surface with your hands. I just put this dough into a banneton. Obviously I'm not using it for its intended purpose, but it does make a handy little bowl shape just to hold the dough while it proves. And I do get my spatula and just press those little creases in the baking paper. That just stops them from sticking into the dough and putting little creases in it, which I don't quite like. Just keeps it nice and neat and tidy, and doesn't put your dough out of shape. This is my proofing setup that I use quite a fair bit of the time, actually. If you're in a hurry at night or you want to just speed up the process a little bit, it was a pretty cool day when I made this bread. I just put a cup of freshly boiled water into this big old roaster that I've got with my dough, and that acts like a bit of a proofing oven and helps to speed up the final proof a bit. So you can't really get a sense of the time with this section of the video, but I'm pretty much going back every half an hour or so and checking the dough. I give it a bit of a wobble and just watch it as it rises every now and then. I use a timer and just go back and check. This proof was 2 hours in total. It's really important though, when you think your dough is getting close to being ready, I'm just touching it there. I don't bother with the poke test. It doesn't really work for me. I tend to go by the wobble test. Yeah, so when you think you've got about half an hour to go, don't forget to preheat your oven. I'm going to bake this loaf in a pot, a casserole pot. But yeah, preheat your oven to 230 degrees Celsius. So yeah, this was after 2 hours. The dough is ready enough for me. I probably could have let it proof a little bit more, but it made a really beautiful loaf, so I was pretty happy with it. Just get my setup ready. And then I get my baking pot, which is really, really hot. So just make sure you're really careful with this stage. This is just a ceramic casserole baker. You can put your dough in anything you like as long as it's oven safe. And I just lift out the dough with the paper and put it into the pot. I do spray this with water. Partly is so that the spatula and the dough don't stick to each other when I get rid of those bumps in the paper again. But also I do tend to have a habit of spraying my dough with water just to create extra steam in the baking, which helps with getting a nice oven a nice oven spring that's not hindered by any crust sort of developing early on. So that goes into the oven and I bake that for 25 minutes with the lid on. And here it is after the initial 25 minutes. It's risen up pretty well. You'll notice I didn't score this loaf. I just decided to let it go to a decent sort of proof and not score it. I'll put it back into the oven and here it is after a further 15 minutes with the lid off. So that loaf is done now. It's a beautiful golden colour. This video doesn't really do that colour justice. I've got some photos you'll see a little bit at the end of the video that show how gorgeous and golden the loaf is. Tap it, yep, it's all good. I pretty much bake my loaves until they're almost burnt. That way I know that they're done. That loaf was just gorgeous. Yeah, really happy with that. I don't take any internal temperatures on my loaf. I just cook them till they're done. And here it is the next morning. I'm really sorry to say that this little section here is out of focus, but once I hold the slices up, you'll be able to see just this cutting part is out of focus. The crust has lost its crunch overnight. It was actually a really humid, rainy weekend that I make this dough, so there's a lot of moisture in the air. So there's nowhere that crust was staying crunchy, but the bread turned out really beautiful with a reasonably open crumb, which can be hard to achieve with 100% whole wheat loaves. And there it is. I have to say too that the flavour in this bread is really quite different to bread that hasn't been through that initial soak. I'm really happy with that. It's just really gorgeous bread. So I really encourage you to give it a try. You probably get more practiced at it than me and make lovely loaves. But yeah, this is a good little trick, a good little starting place, I guess, for 100% whole wheat loaves. These are the nice photos that I took of the bread. It's just a gorgeous loaf, beautiful colour, and the crumbs reasonably open, and the flavour is absolutely outstanding. Really, really good. And there's the final shot. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really do appreciate your support. I've got more info below. Thanks.